This is the ProForm Tour de France CBC on max resistance, and one of my complaints and a common complaint about this bike is the max resistance. However, as you can see in the standard configuration, the max resistance of the ProForm Tour de France is, there's still a pretty good amount of clearance. There's a decent little gap there between the magnets and the flywheel. So in theory, if we could move those magnets a little bit closer to the flywheel, that should be able to increase the max resistance. So that's what we're gonna try and do here today. First of all, I wanna say this is not my idea. Actually, Paul pointed this out to me. So everybody give Paul a thumbs up and tell him thanks down in the comment section if you appreciate that, because this video is really being sparked by his question and comment here. What he did is leave a comment here about the Sams variation of this bike, and it might be possible to increase the max resistance of this bike. So let's give it a try. In order to be able to increase the max resistance of your ProForm, what I had to do is remove the water bottle holder, and then I had to take off this resistance knob and also this nut, which I had to use a crescent wrench that didn't come with the bike to get this off. And then also there is a screw on this side and also on the other side, and then you can just basically pop off this whole assembly and get to down here. Taking a closer look down here, we can see there is a little nut there on some threading, and it appears that if we tighten this up a little bit, we can bring this entire magnet assembly closer to the flywheel, which right now it is on 1. So I need to crank it back to 16. For some reason, this bike seems to always want to return itself to resistance 1 if I stop pedaling it. So I just cranked the resistance back to 16, and you can see the gap there. What we're gonna do is basically just adjust this bolt and see if we can get this thing to be really close to the flywheel, but not quite touching it on max resistance. As you can see here, this little cable is attached to the motor, and you just wanna adjust that because it's the same cable that connects down here. Definitely be careful when you're working with the magnets down there, because I just got a cut. Okay, so I've been in here tinkering around for a while now trying to figure out how this works. First thing you want to do is make sure this is tightened up all the way. So with the magnet all the way in its position number 1, resistance number 1, just go on up here and make sure this is all the way tightened up. All you do is turn at this point, like right here. You don't have to turn this thing, just on here. Like right now I'm loosening it. And if you loosen it, that'll make your max resistance lower. So you just wanna make sure it's all the way tightened up against there. So now, I mean, that's as tight as it goes, which it basically already was. And I'll show you what the magnet looks like now. And that's where it's at now. So I don't know, it might be a little bit closer, but ultimately, I mean, it can get closer than that. So the next place we need to look to adjust is a little more difficult, and that's these bolts. So there's a bolt down there. It looks like that needs to be probably, you gotta adjust this one, which is a little difficult to get to with the spring there. And then you gotta adjust this one on the top here. And then we can bring this entire assembly a little bit closer to increase that max resistance. And it's a little bit annoying because this bike keeps wanting to return back to resistance 1 like all the time. It won't stay in resistance 16 if you're not pedaling. So don't take anything what I'm saying and doing here as advice. Working around these magnets is actually pretty dangerous because there's a really strong force here between these two. So I mean, at minimum, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stuff a towel in between here just in case something goes wrong, and you don't wanna get your fingers pinched between there and that magnet pulling down. So again, this is not advice to you, but this is just what I'm doing. I'm gonna stuff a little towel in there just to kind of ensure that that magnet's not gonna smash down in between. I don't wanna get my finger caught in there. So basically I just kind of pushed the spring down and hooked it over the edge of the bolt there, so it'll kind of push up on this whole assembly, and it'll make it easier for me to loosen this top bolt. After you got the top one adjusted, you just want to snug up this bottom one to kind of bring the two bolts together and lock the whole system together. So that feels pretty snug, so I'm going to see where it's at now. Oh, there we go. I got to show you that gap. If you're finding value in this video, please give me a thumbs up and also share this on social media. Share it on your Facebook page or in a Facebook group related to indoor cycling if you think this could benefit somebody else. Look how close that is. I think there's a gap. Let me pedal it. I don't know, I can see a little bit of a gap between there on the bottom magnet. Oh wait, the flywheel's not exactly round. It's touching in some places. Yeah, so I think I'm gonna need to go back and adjust it. All right, so what I'm gonna do is just kind of do the same thing here. Move this out of the way. First we need to adjust the bottom bolt. Give it a little room to play. Okay, so I just tried to loosen it up a little tiny bit down there. It's probably hard to see what I did there, but basically, you know, just like a fraction of an inch. All right, I think I got it dialed in finally. I got the magnet about as close as I can possibly get it on max resistance to the flywheel. As you can see, that gap there is like very, very small, but it's not rubbing. So ultimately, it took me like a little bit of time tinkering with it. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world to do, but I wouldn't recommend taking these screws out because this whole magnet assembly just kind of popped forward and slammed up against the flywheel. So you don't need to do that, but what I would recommend doing if you're gonna do this, you know, I'm not trying to give you advice here really, because it is a little dangerous. You might cut yourself a little bit, but if you pull this spring down and get to this bottom bolt first is what you gotta do. There's a bottom bolt and you wanna loosen that one up to kind of give it a little bit of free play. And then with your right hand, you can kind of get under here on the magnet and push the whole thing forward once the bottom bolt is loosened up. And then what you gotta do is the top bolt, once it's not pressed up against this metal, it'll be easier to move. It's really hard to get a wrench in here. I mean, if you have a wrench that'll get in there, that's great, but I don't. Once you kind of have a little bit of play there on that top bolt, you just loosen it up a little bit, however much you think that this needs to come closer to the flywheel. And you know, you're probably ultimately gonna have to go back and tinker with it till you get it right, really close to the flywheel, but not touching the flywheel. But anyway, after you loosen that top bolt up, then what you do is you get down here on the bottom side again, and with this thing kind of pulled out of the way, the spring out of the way, which is a little difficult to do, you need to snug up that bolt down there on the bottom and push it up against the metal here. So everything's snugged up real good there against this metal, and then you should be good to go. But before you even mess with that, I would first probably take a look up here and see if you could simply adjust here, because this is another adjustment point. You can kind of micro tune it turning this. So if you don't have it exactly dialed in where you need it, after adjusting these bolts, after adjusting these nuts up here, then maybe you could micro adjust it with this. So the magnets are a lot closer, and in theory, this should create a higher max resistance, but we'll get on there and feel it out and see what it feels like. The ProForm Tour de France CBC from Costco, I felt like the stock form max resistance was equal to about 60 to 62 on the Peloton Bike Plus. I was hopping on the bikes back and forth between, trying to compare because I don't have power pedals because they cost like 500 bucks. So now let's hop on the ProForm Tour de France and see what the new max resistance feels like. But before I do that, will you please give me a thumbs up, because I'd really appreciate it. And also share this video on social media, on Facebook, or in a Facebook group, or anywhere you think that people would find value in knowing this information. So now in theory, the minimum resistance of 1 should be a little bit weaker. I can't notice a difference, to tell you the truth, but I'm just gonna go ahead and bump it straight up to 16 maximum resistance, get straight to the point here and see what it feels like. It's working its way up. And you know what? That did make a big difference. Adjusting this down here and bringing those magnets closer to the flywheel, I can tell that made a significant difference in the maximum resistance. So, you know, if you want to get this bike, but the max resistance is holding you back, just adjusting that does make a huge difference. So before I modified the maximum resistance on the ProForm Tour de France, I thought one of the big lacking factors of that bike was the maximum resistance, but modifying it really did make a pretty big difference. So now what I'm going to do is hop on the Peloton Bike Plus and see what I think the equivalent resistance on the Peloton Bike Plus is compared to the max resistance on this now. And like I mentioned before I modified the resistance on this bike, I feel like the max resistance in a stock form compared to the Peloton Bike Plus equaled about 60 to 62 on the Peloton. So what I did is just kind of hop between bike to bike and just kind of feel it out. What I try to do is pedal at cadence of about 50 in the saddle, sitting down, and just see what that resistance feels like. I think it made a huge difference, honestly, adjusting the max resistance on this thing. So before I feel like it was like 60 or 62 max resistance, like max resistance on this bike was equal to like 60 or 62 on the Peloton Bike Plus. Now I feel like it's more like 79 or 80. So honestly, this bike is capable of like really having a pretty high max resistance as long as you can get that magnet really close to the flywheel. And the Peloton Bike Plus on resistance 79 or 80 is pretty strong resistance. Anyway, I hope this video has been helpful to you. Like I said, please click that like button and share this video on social media, Facebook, Reddit, wherever you'd like, wherever you think people would find value in this. And also, I have something special for you guys coming in my next video, so please be sure to subscribe and check out that next video. Anyway guys, that's all for today. See you next time.